On December 8, 1974, the citizens of Greece voted by a margin of 69% to abolish their monarchy. King Constantine II was in London at the time. He was 34 years old. What happened next is one of the stranger footnotes in 20th-century European history. Constantine didn't fade. His sisters didn't fade. His children didn't fade. Instead, quietly, patiently, and with the assistance of a first cousin once removed named Philip, who happened to be married to the Queen of England, they moved in. This is the story of a royal family that lost a country and, by most measurable standards, barely noticed. They lost a throne. They kept everything else. The Greek royal family, technically stateless after 1974, became, in practice, one of the most successful cases of aristocratic repositioning in modern European history, embedding themselves in the British royal family through Prince Philip, in the Spanish royal family through Queen Sophia, and in the global fashion elite through a duty-free heiress from London. What they lost was a kingdom. What they built instead was something arguably more durable in the 21st century: cultural proximity to power, sustained across 3 generations and 2 continents, without a single vote required. The 1974 referendum wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the end of one particular chapter, and Constantine had already lost the previous one by 7 years. Greece had been under military rule since April 21, 1967, when a group of right-wing colonels launched a coup in the early hours of the morning. Constantine, 26 years old and 3 years into his reign, initially tried to work within the reality that had settled over Athens. The colonels were in the ministries, the tanks were in the streets. He kept his counsel for several months. By December, he had decided to resist. The counter-coup he launched on the morning of December 13, 1967 was, by most historical accounts, poorly planned and rapidly executed. Constantine flew north to Kavala, a port city in northern Greece, and rallied whatever loyal military units he could reach. He made radio addresses from the city's airbase. He waited for a chain of defections from garrison commanders around the country that he expected to follow his lead. The defections didn't materialize. The junta's grip on the military held. Within hours, the accounts say hours, not days, the counter-coup had failed, completely and irreversibly. What followed that evening is documented partly through the family's own recollections, repeated over decades of interviews. He put Anne-Marie, their children, and Prime Minister Konstantinos Kolias on board, and they flew east from Kavala toward Rome, landing on nearly empty tanks. He had to borrow money to refuel. His brother-in-law, the future King Juan Carlos of Spain, had to wire him clothes. There is something almost perfectly calibrated about a deposed king landing on fumes with borrowed money in a borrowed shirt. The indignity is complete and specific. But it also contains, if you look at it from a certain angle, a kind of inventory of the network he already had. A family member who was positioned in Spain, a royal income supplemented by the loyalty of staff, a British airspace that welcomed him without question. The humiliation was real. The infrastructure for recovery was already in place. The family spent roughly 5 years in Rome, then briefly in Denmark, before settling permanently in London by the early 1970s. They bought a house at 4 Linnell Drive in Hampstead Garden Suburb, and that settled address, the specific postcode, the arts and crafts architecture, the views over the heath, became the fixed point from which the family would conduct, for the next 4 decades, the most successful social rehabilitation in modern European royal history. Meanwhile, in Athens, the junta ran the country for 7 more years after Constantine's departure. In June 1973, the colonels declared a republic by decree, announced Constantine deposed, and held their own referendum in July of that year. The result? 78.57% for a republic, was so implausible that most international observers dismissed it as fabricated. Georgios Papadopoulos used it to declare himself president. The regime was using democratic theater as a prop for a dictatorship. The junta collapsed in the summer of 1974, discredited by its catastrophic handling of the Cyprus crisis. Konstantinos Karamanlis, the veteran conservative statesman who had been living in exile in Paris, returned to Athens on the night of July 23rd on a jet provided by French President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. His task was to guide the transition to civilian rule and to schedule elections that couldn't be questioned. One of his government's first decisions was to rerun the monarchy referendum under conditions that couldn't be manipulated. The 1973 junta vote was set aside as legally worthless. December 8th was set as the date for a clean plebiscite. Constantine didn't travel to Greece. The advice from Karamanlis's circle was that it wouldn't be wise for him to return before some time had passed. He made a televised address to the Greek nation from London, speaking in favor of restoring the constitutional monarchy. When the result came in, 3,245,111 votes for a republic, 1,445,875 for the monarchy. The margin was 69.18%. Not 69% rounded for comfort, but 69.18%. A number precise enough to leave no ambiguity about the mood of the country. In some regions of Crete, the vote against the monarchy exceeded 90%. Even in Laconia, which gave the monarchy its strongest result nationally, nearly 41% voted for a republic. Constantine accepted the outcome without contest. His public statement at the time was unambiguous. If the Greek people decided that they wanted a republic, they were entitled to have that, and should be left in peace to enjoy it. He had protested the 1973 junta referendum as fraudulent. He accepted the 1974 democratic one. In 1975, the new Greek constitution was promulgated, establishing the Third Hellenic Republic. On paper, Constantine was finished. He didn't go back to Greece for 46 years. Here is what most people who have watched The Crown don't register. By the time Constantine needed a soft landing in London, one was already built and waiting. Its architect was a man born on Corfu in June 1921, who had done all of this before, under different circumstances, at a considerably more helpless age. Prince Philip, born Philippos, Prince of Greece and Denmark, was 18 months old in December 1922 when the Greek monarchy collapsed for the first time. The context was the same genus of disaster: military defeat and political collapse. Greece's catastrophic campaign in Anatolia had ended in the destruction of the Greek army and the burning of Smyrna. Philip's uncle, King Constantine I, not the later Constantine II, an entirely different man, had been blamed for the military disaster and forced to abdicate. Philip's father, Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark, was court-martialed, accused of disobeying orders in the field, and stood at genuine risk of execution before British diplomatic intervention secured his release. King George V sent a naval mission and dispatched HMS Calypso to Corfu to evacuate the family. Philip was carried aboard in an orange crate, a makeshift bassinet improvised from whatever was to hand on the ship. Multiple independent sources confirm this specific detail. Philip Eads' biography describes the fruit crate explicitly. Woman's World, citing the same book, specifies it was a crate of oranges. A 2022 Royal History volume describes the 18-month-old infant, an orange box for his, on board HMS Calypso, a British light cruiser vessel. The terminology varies across accounts: orange box, orange crate, fruit box, fruit crate. But the vessel is always HMS Calypso, and the improvised cradle is always there. Picture the scene on that December night on the Ionian Sea. a light cruiser riding at anchor off Corfu, the family of a court-martialed prince being ferried aboard in the dark, someone having the practical thought to line a wooden fruit crate with whatever soft material was available and settle the baby into it for the crossing. The indignity of the orange crate is also the pragmatism of the orange crate. An empire's navy improvising a solution to a European royal family's sudden statelessness. It wouldn't be the last time. The family settled in France. Philip was educated partly in Germany and partly at Gordonston, the Spartan Highland school that the British royal family would later make famous by sending Charles there. He served in the Royal Navy through the Second World War, distinguishing himself at the Battle of Cape Matapan in March 1941, where the Mediterranean fleet destroyed 3 Italian heavy cruisers in a night action. He was mentioned in dispatches. His path toward Princess Elizabeth had been discussed in royal circles since the mid-1930s. The marriage was delayed by the war and by the political calculations around a Greek-born officer becoming consort to the British heir. In November 1947, they married. Philip renounced his Greek and Danish titles, took British nationality, and moved permanently into the institution that would, exactly 20 years later, become the most natural landing point for his exiled Greek relatives. He had not simply married into the British monarchy. He had reconstructed himself as entirely British. The name, the allegiance, the naval career, the manner. He was so thoroughly anglicized by 1967 that when Constantine needed him, Philip wasn't visibly a Greek royal in exile. He was the Duke of Edinburgh, the Queen's husband, one of the most recognizable figures on earth. The transformation was total, and it served as the template, consciously or not, for what the broader family would spend the next 50 years attempting. The family tree requires one precise explanation, because it underpins everything. Philip's father, Prince Andrew, was a son of King George I of Greece. Constantine II's father, King Paul I, was also a son of King George I. That made Philip and Paul I first cousins, and Philip and Constantine himself first cousins once removed. Close enough that Philip attended Constantine's wedding to Princess Anne Marie of Denmark in Athens in September 1964, bringing a 15-year-old Prince Charles as his companion. Close enough that Princess Anne served as a bridesmaid. Close enough that Philip, through the years of exile, stayed in touch with his Greek family, as one account puts it with very English understatement. The connection didn't just hold. It compounded across generations. Constantine became godfather to Prince William, christened in the music room of Buckingham Palace in April 1982. Contemporary press reports note that Constantine attended with his whole family. 15 years later, he attended William's confirmation at Windsor Castle, photographed in the official group behind Harry and Diana. Then, in April 1999, the direction reversed. William, 16 years old, his arm in a sling following surgery on a broken finger the weekend before, became godfather to Constantine's grandson, Prince Constantine Alexios, at St. Sophia's Cathedral in London. He carried the infant in a circle during the Greek Orthodox ceremony, as tradition required, cradling the baby with his good arm while the congregation watched. The symbolism was accidental and complete. Crown Prince Pavlo said later that Queen Elizabeth always received us with a smile, and that his parents were very well taken care of by her when we left Greece and lived in England for years. He described his father as one of Elizabeth's confidants. The word is diplomatic. The relationship it describes was real and sustained across 4 decades of proximity, built through baptisms, confirmations, Christmases at Sandringham, holidays in Majorca. The parallel is worth sitting with. In December 1922, an 18-month-old Greek prince was evacuated from Corfu on a British warship, placed in an orange crate for the crossing, and deposited on the continent with no country and no prospects. In December 1967, a Greek king fled Kavala on nearly empty tanks, landed in Rome in a borrowed shirt, and made his way eventually to a house in North London. Philip built a life so thoroughly British that the exile became invisible. Constantine would build a version of the same thing. The crate and the plane were separated by 45 years. The essential condition? Greek royal, British rescue, London landing was the same. Philip wasn't the only prepositioned asset. In May 1962, in Athens, Princess Sophia of Greece and Denmark married Prince Juan Carlos of Spain. She was 23 years old, eldest daughter of King Paul I, which made her Constantine's full sister. Juan Carlos was 24. The wedding involved 3 ceremonies: Catholic, Greek Orthodox, and civil. Hundreds of thousands of spectators gathered in the streets of Athens to watch. Juan Carlos wasn't yet the designated heir to Spain. He was the son of Don Juan, the Count of Barcelona, who was himself the legitimate heir in the Bourbon line. But Franco had been maneuvering around Don Juan for years, considering options for succession. It wasn't until 1969 that Franco officially named Juan Carlos heir apparent, gave him the title Prince of Spain, and required him to swear fidelity to the principles of the Francoist movement. Juan Carlos swore. 7 years after the wedding. So Sophia's marriage in 1962 wasn't a calculated step onto a guaranteed throne. It was a bet, made without certainty, as most consequential bets are. The bet came in when Franco died in November 1975. Juan Carlos became king within hours of the announcement. Sophia became Queen of Spain and would remain so for decades. The significance for Constantine's story is this. When he flew out of Kavala in December 1967 with borrowed clothes and a nearly empty fuel tank, his sister was already embedded in the Spanish royal family. When she became queen 8 years later, the exiled king of Greece had, sitting near the center of European monarchy, a woman who had grown up with him at Tatoy Palace. Pavlos and Felipe of Spain. The future King Felipe VI would later be roommates at Georgetown University during Pavlos's graduate degree in the mid-1990s. First cousins sharing a university apartment in Washington. The network was generational and self-reinforcing. These connections don't develop through scheming. They develop through marriages that survive, maintained by loyalty across decades of contact, strengthened by proximity and shared history. The Greek royals didn't engineer their way into the European royal constellation after 1974. They were already in it when the crisis came. What the exile revealed was that those connections were structural rather than situational, durable enough to carry the weight of statelessness for half a century. The house at 4 Linnell Drive in Hampstead Garden suburb was, by any reasonable measure, a remarkable place to land. 13 bedrooms, 10 bathrooms, 9,500 square feet of arts and crafts architecture set on half an acre of garden, with views over Hampstead Heath that the estate agent who eventually sold it described as making the garden look hundreds of acres wide. The property sat around the corner from the Bishop's Avenue, the road that tabloids call Billionaires' Row, lined with the kind of houses that oil wealth and oligarch money accumulated in the 1990s and 2000s. Constantine had bought the house from a man named Bob Tanner, a well-known entrepreneur, for £325,000 sometime after the 1967 coup. He would eventually sell it in 2013 for $9.8 million. That is a 46-year hold on a property that appreciated by a factor of 30. The Hampstead years produced, by almost all accounts, something unexpectedly ordinary. Constantine and Anne-Marie raised 5 children in those rooms: Alexia, Pavlos, Nikolaos, Theodora, Philippos, and the house ran as family houses run, children going in and out, meals, school schedules, the compressed domestic logistics of a large family in a large house. Diana was a regular presence, driving William and Harry over in her open-topped Mercedes convertible. Charles reportedly objected to the foreign-made car, for playdates with Theodora and Philippos, who were close in age to the young princes. The estate agent who sold the house recalled years later, "They were always in and out of that house. It was a very happy home full of gaiety." Charles was genuinely close to Constantine. They took holidays together in 1990 in Majorca, joined by the Spanish royals. Queen Elizabeth became Princess Theodora's godmother in 1983, attending the baptism at St. Sophia's Cathedral in London. The social fabric stitched itself together over years and decades. Constantine gave an interview to Al Jazeera from that house in 2007. By then, he had been in Hampstead for roughly 35 years. He had watched his children grow up through the North London school system, had been to Balmoral and Sandringham as a family friend of the house, had attended the weddings and confirmations and christenings that accumulate over decades of proximity to one institution. The exile had calcified, quietly, into something that looked from the outside like a life. The household was financed, in part, through a group of wealthy Greek sympathizers, diaspora businessmen, shipping families, who organized informal support for the exiled royals during the London years, according to later reporting by Australian Women's Weekly. The exact figures and arrangements were never made public. What's documented is the property, the social calendar, and the fact that the family wasn't scrambling. In 1994, the Greek government revoked the family's Greek citizenship. The official reasoning was linked to ongoing property disputes and to Constantine's refusal to formally renounce, on behalf of his descendants, any claim to the Greek throne. Constantine filed cases at the European Court of Human Rights regarding the family's property in Greece. The legal relationship between the former king and the Greek state was, beneath the photogenic surface of royal christenings and Hampstead garden parties, actively contested for decades. Two stories ran simultaneously: the social one, which was pleasant, and the legal one, which was adversarial. And then Pavlos met Marie Chantal Miller at a birthday party in New Orleans, and everything shifted register. The specific occasion was the 40th birthday party of Philip Niarchos, son of Greek shipping magnate Stavros Niarchos, held in New Orleans around 1992. The introduction was made by Alexander Papamarchou, Aleko, universally, a New York investment banker and billionaire, son of a man who had been an aide to Pavlos's grandfather, King Paul. Papamarchou had an existing client relationship with Marie Chantal's father, and had spoken to Pavlos about her before the party. He brought them together at the Niarchos event. According to Marie Chantal, speaking to Vanity Fair in 2008, "It was love at first sight. I knew that Pavlos was the person I would marry." Pavlos was at Georgetown University's Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at the time, completing a master's degree in international relations and economics. His roommate was his first cousin Felipe, Prince of Asturias, the future King Felipe VI of Spain. Marie Chantal was on leave from New York University, studying art history. She later attended the Corcoran College of Art and Design to be closer to Pavlos while he finished his degree. Pavlos proposed in December 1994 on a ski lift in Gstaad, Switzerland. He formally asked her parents' permission afterward. Constantine announced the engagement from London on January 11, 1995, and called himself over the moon about this. Marie Chantal Miller had been born in London in 1968. Her father, Robert Warren Miller, was an American who had co-founded Duty Free Shoppers, DFS, in Hong Kong in the 1950s, alongside Charles Feeney. Both men had grown up in working-class American communities. Feeney would later become famous for quietly divesting nearly his entire fortune through philanthropy. Miller's trajectory ran differently. Forbes confirmed him as a billionaire. LVMH acquired a stake in DFS in 1997. Her mother was Ecuadorian. Marie Chantal holds American citizenship. Her older sister Pia had married Christopher Getty, grandson of oil industrialist J. Paul Getty. Her sister Alexandra became engaged to Prince Alexander von Furstenberg. The Miller sisters were, by every social metric of the 1990s international circuit, firmly embedded in the upper tier of global society before any of them acquired a royal title. Robert Miller provided his daughter with a dowry reported at £200 million. Marie Chantal converted from Catholicism to Greek Orthodoxy before the wedding, received into the church at St. Paul's Chapel in New York in May 1995, with Papa Marcoux himself acting as her godfather. She and Pavlos traveled to Istanbul to be blessed by ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew I. The entire preparation for the wedding was conducted with the same meticulous attention to symbolic weight that the bride's family applied to everything. The wedding took place on 1 July 1995 at St. Sophia's Cathedral in Bayswater, London. The ceremony lasted over an hour, conducted in Greek, led by the Archbishop of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of Thyatira and Great Britain, with 10 prelates officiating. 450 guests sat inside the cathedral. Another 850, including Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, watched via satellite from Hampton Court Palace, where Lady Elizabeth Anson, who had organized the catering for Charles and Diana's 1981 wedding, had replicated the operational precision of the most famous royal ceremony of the preceding decade. Her brother, Patrick Anson, the Earl of Lichfield, was the official photographer. Same role, same family. The same institutional memory at work. The floral decoration inside St. Sophia's, 30,000 pink flowers, lilies and peonies and carnations hung in garlands, was handled by the personal florist of the Danish royal family, Eric Bering, and 6 assistants. The pre-wedding events at Rotham Park, a Palladian mansion in Hertfordshire, hosted between 1,200 and 1,300 guests over 2 nights. 2 giant marquees were designed to resemble the Parthenon, decorated in blue and white, the national colors of Greece, with hand-stamped cork floors, a false linen ceiling, pillars, and a cornice fabricated to look like marble. The tent designer was Robert Isabel, a last-minute addition called in from New York by Marie Chantal's mother after a miscalculation in the amount of fabric threatened to collapse the entire visual concept. Isabel, reached on short notice, said, "I'll take the Concorde and be there tomorrow. Get me a room at Claridge's, and we'll put this thing together." He reconceived the entire structure on the flight over. Once assembled, the lights behind the Parthenon marquee were so extensive they required clearance from London Heathrow Airport. 100,000 flowers had been flown in from Ecuador. After cocktails were finished, a white curtain behind the pillars was pulled back, and guests walked through to dinner, where large urns on laurel-wrapped pedestals each held thousands of yellow and orange Ecuadorian roses. The reception continued until 4 in the morning, when most of the remaining guests settled for a champagne breakfast. Prince Philip drove himself to the Rotham Park reception in a Land Rover. Marie Chantal's wedding gown was made by Valentino Garavani. Pearl-encrusted ivory silk, tulip-shaped front, a 4.5-meter Chantilly lace train. 25 people worked on the dress for 4 months, using 12 different kinds of lace. The reported cost was $225,000, as were the ensembles for her mother and sisters. Valentino's Roman atelier produced 62 additional outfits for the wedding in total, including the dresses for Queen Sofia of Spain, the Infanta Cristina, and Empress Farah Pahlavi of Iran. The 8-tier wedding cake was designed by Colette Peters of New York. 300 additional cakes, 1 per table, accompanied it. The cake's design was inspired by a china pattern from the royal collection. Valentino himself remarked afterward, "I have never been to such a beautifully arranged wedding. The flowers, the tables, the tent." 8 kings and 11 queens attended. The press called it the largest gathering of royalty in London since the 1947 wedding of Elizabeth and Philip. More monarchs were present than had attended Charles and Diana's wedding 14 years earlier. The Greek government, led at the time by Prime Minister Andreas Papandreou, demanded the resignation of the 10 conservative New Democracy members of Parliament who had attended the ceremony, arguing they had lent tacit support to monarchist restoration. The wedding was broadcast live in Greece and drew significant audiences on both leading channels. Opinion polls taken afterward showed a notable boost in popularity for the former royal family inside Greece itself. A family stripped of its citizenship in 1994, with no official standing in the country of its name, had just assembled more crowned heads in London than any event in half a century. The tent looked like the Parthenon. The Concorde had been chartered to fix the fabric. Valentino himself said he had never seen a better arranged wedding. The matchmaker Papa Markou wasn't in the cathedral when the couple married. He was reportedly recovering from surgery, and according to a W magazine account, there had been a falling out with Constantine after Papa Markou reportedly sought some form of commission for his services. The man who engineered the most consequential match in modern Greek royal history watched it happen from elsewhere. History is full of small ironies. Marie Chantal settled into London and became, over the following decade, something specific and worth naming. She is called MC by her friends. That detail appears in Patler's coronation coverage from May 2023, where she arrived at the coronation of King Charles III wearing a pale cornflower blue dress by the Greek designer Mary Katrantzou. Patler's description of her entrance, a slick of shiny blonde hair that flashes, is the kind of capsule writing that suggests the editors had been watching this woman for a long time and found exactly the right shorthand. In 2000, she founded a luxury children's fashion brand under her own name, based in London's Belgravia. The brand describes itself on its website as founded in 2000 by Princess Marie Chantal of Greece, mother, creative director, and author. Over 2 decades later, the brand is still running and internationally distributed. Susie Menkes interviewed her for the New York Times in 2013, linking the brand's commercial philosophy to her father's influence on her thinking about retail and luxury. Sheer Luxe has profiled her on the logistics of running a fashion business alongside 5 children. New York Social Diary has run a society portrait under the heading Society Dreams, Crown Princess Marie Chantal of Greece. She and Pavlos attended a Norman Foster Foundation visit in Madrid. Tatler covered their 30th wedding anniversary on the island of Spetses. The fashion media's interest in her isn't casual. A 2019 academic paper explicitly used her as a central case study in what the researcher termed fashioning the fashion princess, the mechanism by which a princess without a functioning throne constructs durable public authority through sustained proximity to the fashion industry. Another academic study from around the same period described her in the language of verbal portraits of European royal children as a jet-setting model. The framing is academic. The phenomenon is observable on any newsstand. She is covered as a style authority, not as a curiosity. She is reviewed as a brand founder, not as a former royal in reduced circumstances. She holds positions, contributing editor roles, foundation board memberships, patron designations that carry actual function rather than purely ornamental title. Her daughter Olympia, in a 2020 British Vogue interview about couture fashion, observed that her mother owned some great pieces because she's very close to Valentino. He made her wedding dress. During lockdown that year, mother and daughter had gone through Marie Chantal's wardrobe archive together. Olympia had tried everything on. The mother wasn't ready to pass the pieces down yet. That exchange, trivial on its surface, captures something precise. A woman who arrived as the daughter of a duty-free billionaire had, 20 years later, an archive wardrobe worth excavating. The crown is decorative. The access is real, accumulated season by season over years of being somewhere that matters when something that matters is happening. The third generation dispensed with even the pretense of needing the title. Princess Maria Olympia of Greece and Denmark was born in 1996, eldest child of Pavlos and Marie Chantal. She grew up in London, then in New York when the family relocated there. She attended New York University, graduating with a degree in fashion business and marketing. When she was 16 or 17, during Raf Simons's tenure at Dior, which ran from 2012 to 2015, she interned at Christian Dior Couture in Paris. She has described the experience in detail in multiple interviews. The hierarchy inside the atelier was steep. There were Central St. Martin's postgraduate students above her. Her role was elementary and specific. Ensure that Look 37's train looked perfect backstage at the couture show. She found the whole operation, the step-by-step construction, the handwork, the number of people working on a single garment. Incredible. The knowledge that 25 people had spent 4 months on her mother's wedding dress was, she said, the kind of thing that changes how you look at fabric. Her first couture show had been at age 11, when her parents took her to Valentino in Rome. I remember sitting on my father's lap and thinking, this is unbelievable, she told British Vogue in 2020. During the pandemic digital couture season, watching shows on her laptop on a train to Gloucester, she reflected that her grandmother had told her, in her time, couture wasn't about what you were wearing, it was about what the models were wearing. She found this observation useful. She also, in a more normal Paris season, sat next to Emma Watson at a Valentino haute couture show and described it, with apparent sincerity, as exciting rather than expected. She signed with talent agency Untitled Entertainment in 2018. The campaigns since then form a complete inventory of contemporary luxury fashion. Michael Kors alongside Solange Knowles, Pretty Ballerinas, Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Tiffany, Bulgari, Prada, Dolce & Gabbana, Carolina Herrera, Emilia Wickstead. She opened the Saks Potts show at Copenhagen Fashion Week. She graduated from NYU and became a contributing editor at Moda Operandi. She had first interned there as an undergraduate in 2017, then joined formally in February 2025. Her friend, Lauren Santo Domingo, founded the company. They appear in each other's social media, at basketball games, at family christenings in the Hamptons. In early 2026, Tatler filed a piece under the Royals category. Princess Olympia of Greece takes New York. Society Swan dresses down in sportswear for a basketball game. The article documented her at Madison Square Garden with Santo Domingo for a Knicks game against the Brooklyn Nets. Olympia in Knicks merchandise and flared jeans, arm in arm in the arena after a 120-66 win. Santo Domingo's Instagram story read, "Got merch?" The cultural distance between that image and the fall of the Hellenic monarchy is roughly a century and 4 generations. The genealogical distance is direct and documented. Her brother Prince Constantine Alexios, Tino to his friends, was born in New York in October 1998. His godparents include King Felipe VI of Spain, King Frederick of Denmark, Prince William, and Crown Princess Victoria of Sweden. He attended Wetherby School in London, which counts Prince Harry, Hugh Grant, and Lord Frederick Windsor among its alumni. Then Wellington College, then Georgetown University, graduating in 2022 with a degree in English. He is described as a painter and sculptor, whose work draws on Greek mythology. He has modeled for Dior, photographed by Nikolai von Bismarck for the Dior Sessions, the first book the house produced to focus exclusively on menswear. His social coverage in recent years has linked him to Poppy Delevingne, who subsequently became close friends with his sister Olympia, to Sports Illustrated model Brooks Nader, with whom he attended the Rhode Island wedding of actress Olivia Culpo and NFL player Christian McCaffrey in June 2024, and to the actress Madeline Klein. His Instagram shows weekends in the Bahamas, the Cresta Run in St. Moritz, hunting trips. His grandmother would recognize the terrain. His grandfather navigated it from a different position. Tatiana Blatnik, who married Constantine's son, Prince Nikolaus, in August 2010 at the Cathedral of Eos Nikolaos on Spetses, represents a slightly different trajectory but the same fundamental pattern. Born in Caracas to parents of Slovenian and German origin, raised in Switzerland, she graduated from Georgetown University in 2003 with a degree in sociology and worked as a publicist and event planner in the fashion department of Diane von Furstenberg before the wedding. Vogue ran a long profile in 2016, The Strange, Sweet Odyssey of Princess Tatiana of Greece, when she was living in Athens, working with Greek food charity Baroume during the worst years of the debt crisis, publishing a cookbook with contributions from Margaret Atwood, Ariana Huffington, and Valentino Garavani. She described arriving in Athens in 2013 feeling that everyone was traveling in the opposite direction, as austerity hollowed out the middle class around her. She chose to stay anyway and work. She and Nikolaos separated amicably in 2024 after 14 years. She retained her title. She announced she would continue living in Greece. In late 2024, 10 members of the former royal family formally applied for Greek citizenship, explicitly acknowledging the republican system of government as a condition of the application. The citizenship was granted. The family issued a statement describing their response as one of deep emotion. This is the same family that in 1994 had its citizenship revoked specifically because Constantine refused to formally acknowledge the republic for his descendants. 30 years later, they applied by doing exactly that and were welcomed back by the Greek state without condition. The family that refused to acknowledge the republic for a generation formally acknowledged it to come home. Both sides, apparently, found this acceptable. That isn't defeat. That is resolution, arrived at on terms that suited everyone well enough, over a very long time. Constantine II died on January 10, 2023, in Athens. He was 82 years old. He had suffered a stroke and been placed in intensive care in a private hospital in the city. He had moved back to Greece in December 2013 after 46 years away, living in a villa on the Argolis Peninsula with Anne-Marie. He spent the last decade of his life in the country whose citizens had voted him out. The Guardian ran the headline in December 2013 that he had moved back to his crisis-plagued homeland, noting the awkward timing with the dry affection that British newspapers reserve for situations they find simultaneously absurd and touching. The return had not been easy by some reckonings. Greece, in 2013, was at the worst point of its sovereign debt crisis, with youth unemployment approaching 50% and the middle class being carved apart by austerity conditions. Constantine and Anne-Marie arrived just as many wealthy Greeks were doing the opposite, leaving for London, New York, anywhere that wasn't Athens. Their son, Nikolaos, had arrived a few months earlier with Tatiana, who later described driving in that first time and feeling that everyone was traveling in the opposite direction. But they came anyway. He had waited 46 years. Whatever the country looked like when he returned, it was still the country. He was 82 when it ended. Ekathimerini, the English edition of Kathimerini, Greece's paper of record, published 2 pieces Constantine II, the last king of Greece, and Constantine II, from royal coup to downfall. The Guardian's obituary, published the day after his death, opened with characteristic British understatement. By the standards of the hapless Greek monarchy, Constantine II, the last king of the Hellenes, who has died aged 82, led a comfortable life. That sentence is doing a lot of work. The Greek monarchy's record includes assassination, forced abdications, 2 world wars, a civil war, a military coup, a counter-coup, a fraudulent referendum, a legitimate one, and at least 3 exiles across 4 generations. Comfortable is a relative term, but relative to all of that, the obituary writer had a point. The Greek government declined the family's request for a full state funeral. It subsequently agreed to accord Constantine a lying-in state and a funeral procession. Not complete state honors, but a formal acknowledgement. European royalty gathered in Athens for the service. Princess Anne attended on behalf of the British royal family. Crown Prince Pavlos had already represented his family at Queen Elizabeth's state funeral in September 2022. Constantine had been too ill to travel to London, and in that Westminster Abbey moment, standing among the crowned heads of Europe for the funeral of the woman whose family had housed his own for 4 decades, something completed quietly. Constantine was interred at the Tatoi estate outside Athens, the former royal family's ancestral summer residence, set in forested hills north of the city, which has a royal cemetery used by Greek kings since the early 20th century. The estate's legal history relative to the royal family is complicated. Sources from around 2003 reference what appears to be some form of legal settlement between the family and the Greek state, one that seems to have touched on outstanding property claims and the estate's status. A law review source suggests an agreement involving a waiver of official title claims alongside certain property arrangements. The precise terms of any such deal aren't fully confirmed in available public records. What can be confirmed? The royal cemetery at Tatoi exists and functions. Constantine was buried there, and some legal framework preceded those burial rites. The Greek crown jewels are an appropriate place to end, because they remain genuinely unresolved. The ownership and provenance of the royal collection after 1974 is legally contested. Available sources, legal databases, heritage records, court filings, don't settle the question. The relationship between the former royal family and the Greek state over property, inheritance, and movable assets was adversarial and legally active for decades, with Constantine filing European Court of Human Rights claims at multiple points. What happened to the jewels specifically? Who holds legal title to them now? And where they physically reside? These questions exist in the public record as open. The research confirms the dispute exists. It doesn't resolve it. And this script won't pretend otherwise. What the jewels illustrate is that the relationship between the Greek state and the Greek royal family was never simply finished after 1974. It ran through property claims, citizenship disputes, European human rights filings, and decades of legal negotiation, even as the christenings and Tatler coverage continued on the surface. 2 stories ran simultaneously across those 50 years, the social one, which was pleasant and productive, and the legal one, which was adversarial and unresolved. Both were real. So here is the ledger. On December 8, 1974, Constantine II was a 34-year-old king in London with no country. His Greek citizenship would be revoked 20 years later. His property claims were contested through multiple legal systems for decades. He spent 46 years in exile before returning to a republic that considered his title constitutionally meaningless and declined to grant him a full state funeral. Against that, Prince Philip had been embedded in the British monarchy since 1947. 20 years before Constantine needed him. Queen Sophia became Queen of Spain in 1975 and remained so for 4 decades. Pavlos married into a family whose fortune was built on duty-free retail. Robert Miller and Charles Feeney's DFS had grown from a concept built in airport terminals into a global operation attractive enough that LVMH acquired a stake in 1997. Marie Chantal founded a luxury children's brand in 2000 that 2 decades later was still running from Belgravia, still being profiled in the Times and Tatler. Still operating at the intersection of fashion and old money, she navigated as easily as breathing. Princess Olympia fronts campaigns for Gucci and Louis Vuitton and sits courtside in New York with the founders of fashion media companies. Prince Constantine Alexios is modeled by Dior and photographed by some of the most prominent names in contemporary fashion. His godparents include 2 reigning kings and 2 heirs apparent. The citizenship revoked in 1994 was formally restored after the family acknowledged the Republic, which is to say, after the family made a straightforward pragmatic decision, which is something they have been consistently good at across 3 generations. Constantine died in January 2023 in Athens, the city he had left on nearly empty tanks, in a borrowed shirt, with borrowed money in his pocket. He died in a private hospital without state honors, in the country that had voted against him by nearly 70 points. His children flew in from London, Madrid, and New York. Each of them had a passport from a country whose royal family they were connected to. Each of them had a life, functional, full, genuinely lived, in a country that had, on terms that suited everyone well enough, taken them in. George II of Greece, who reigned briefly in the 1920s and again from 1935 to 1947, once observed that the most important tool for a Greek king was a suitcase. His successor managed to unpack it so thoroughly that 3 generations have made their lives from its contents. The monarchy is gone. It has been gone for over 50 years. The royals, by every available measure, are doing fine. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Dynasties, displacement, and the strange resilience of people who already knew the right address book before the crisis hit.